Hey, political scientists and computer experts, it's your boy here, Thor Hansen, and welcome back to another political science video. Today, we're looking at Liberalism Explained. This has been a viewer requested video by some commenters. Let's get started. So, first of all, liberalism in a nutshell. Liberalism is a political philosophy and ideology that emphasizes individual rights, limited government, and a market-based economy. Liberals believe that liberalism works for a few key reasons. 1. It protects individual liberty. 2. It promotes economic prosperity. 3. It supports gradual pragmatic reforms. 4. It checks on government overreach. 5. It promotes equality of opportunity. And 6. It fosters international cooperation. The key points of liberalism. Individual rights and freedoms. Liberalism emphasizes on the inherent rights and freedoms of the individual, such as freedom of speech, religion, press, and association. This includes protecting individual liberty from excessive government power or control. Liberals see individual rights and freedoms as fundamental and believe that limiting government power is necessary to preserve personal liberty. By restricting the state's ability to infringe on civil liberties, they argue that this protects people from authoritarian control. Limited government. Liberals generally favor a limited role for the government, with a focus on protecting individual rights rather than excessive state power over people's lives. They tend to be skeptical of concentrations of government authority. They are wary of excessive government intervention and seek to constrain the authority of the state. Liberals see their philosophy as a crucial check on the potential for government power to be abused or applied in ways that undermine individual liberty. Limiting state authority, they argue, prevents concentrations of power. Equality of opportunity. Liberals believe in the principle of equality of opportunity, where individuals should have fair and equal chances to succeed rather than equality of outcomes. This is something that I disagree with. Everybody should have equality of outcome, but this isn't my personal opinion. This is a video on liberalism. Equality of opportunity includes removing unfair barriers and discrimination, but not necessarily guaranteeing equal results. Liberals advocate for equality of opportunity, where individuals have fair chances to succeed rather than enforcing equality of outcomes. This involves removing unfair barriers and discrimination, but not necessarily guaranteeing equal results. By removing unfair barriers and discrimination, liberals believe they can create a more level playing field where people have a fair shot at succeeding based on their own merits, rather than being held back by systematic disadvantages. This also puts forward the idea that liberals heavily care about the rights of LGBT individuals and minorities, believing that everybody should have equality of opportunity. They believe that these people shouldn't be held back by systematic disadvantages of the system. Free market economics. Most liberals support free market capitalism, also known as laissez-faire capitalism, which is the French term for let it be. Their preferred economic system with minimal government intervention in the economy. This includes protecting private property rights and freedom of enterprise. Liberals believe in the power of private enterprise, property rights, and free trade. Liberals generally favor free market capitalism and limited government intervention in the economy. They believe this unleashes the innovative and productive potential of private enterprise, ultimately driving economic growth and prosperity. This is what conservatives don't understand about liberals. They think liberals are socialists because they don't know anything about political science. No, liberals believe in laissez-faire capitalism as the best economic system. They believe in private ownership and private enterprise and private property rights and free trade with minimal government intervention. They are not socialists. I am a socialist, and liberals heavily disagree with the way that I think, because I don't believe in private property, I don't believe in free trade, and I certainly don't believe in free market capitalism. But this isn't an opinion video. This is a video about free market economics and liberalism, and I'm just explaining the differences of the two, because a lot of people get these mixed up and they use socialist as a insult when they have no idea what the word even means. The separation of church and state. Liberals typically advocate for a clear separation between religious institutions and functions of the government. They oppose the establishment of any state religion or undue religious influence over public policy, which also on this note, liberals heavily are against any public policy that has religious influence in it, such as vouchers, which is taxpayer money for religious schools that support the teaching of creationism as opposed to evolution. They are heavily opposed to anything that would support schools of the like, and they firmly believe that schools should be teaching the only system of thought, which is evolution. They are heavily opposed to the teaching of creationism in schools, as they see violates the separation of church and state. According to a Pew Research, 72% of liberals heavily favor the separation of church and state and advocate for a step further with something called state-sponsored atheism, where the government does not support any religion and they only put forth scientific secular policies instead of favoring one religion, which our government absolutely does. Progressivism and reform. Many modern liberals associate with a progressive agenda, seeking gradual reforms to address social and economic inequalities. This could include support for an expanded social safety net, civil rights protections, environmental regulations, and regulating industries for the public good. Many modern liberals support a gradualist, pragmatic approach to social and economic reforms. They argue this allows for measured, evidence-based changes that address inequalities without resorting to radical, disruptive upheaval. What they mean by radical, disruptive upheaval is the government interfering with the free market. They think that's a problem. I don't see it as a problem. I think the economy needs to have government intervention to function, but this is liberalism, and that's what liberalism strives for, is free market capitalism without resorting to radical disruptive upheaval. Internationalism and cooperation. Liberals often favor international cooperation, free trade, and a more active role for the United States in global affairs. Many support international institutions like the United Nations to address shared challenges such as climate change. Many liberals support a more active role for the U.S. and international institutions in cooperation. They argue this can address global challenges and promote stability, peace, and shared prosperity. The origins of liberalism. The origins of liberalism, Part 1. Liberalism started as a form of political thought in the 17th and 18th century during the Enlightenment period. As far as we know, liberalism was a philosophy founded by Enlightenment thinker John Locke as a way of outlining what he thought society should be. His key points were as follows: the emphasis on individual rights and freedoms such as life, liberty, and property. Locke argued that individuals have natural rights that should be protected by the state, that these natural rights can never be taken away. The idea of limited government and separation of powers, with checks and balances to prevent the concentration of power, as championed by thinkers like Baron de Montesquieu. The belief in equality under the law and equal opportunity, which was a reaction against the rigid hierarchies and privileges of the feudal and absolutist systems. The origins of liberalism, Part 2. The embrace of empiricism, reason, and science over traditional authority and dogma, as exemplified by the work of Enlightenment figures like Voltaire and Diderot. The support of free market economics and opposition to economic interventionism by the state, as articulated by Adam Smith in his seminal work, The Wealth of Nations. These core liberal principles of individual rights, limited government, equality, and free markets provided an intellectual foundation that challenged the existing political and economic order in Europe. They were instrumental in inspiring revolutions and reforms such as the American and French revolutions, and sought to establish a more liberal society. Over time, liberalism evolved and branched out into different schools of thought, such as classical liberalism, social liberalism, and neoliberalism, each with its own emphasis and priorities. Key figures in liberalism. Key figures, Part 1. The most important is John Locke, 1632 to 1704. Considered a foundational thinker of classical liberalism, Locke emphasized natural rights, consent of the governed, and limited government. John Stuart Mill, a prominent 19th century liberal, Mill wrote extensively on individual liberty, representative government, and women's rights. Woodrow Wilson, the 28th U.S. president, Wilson promoted internationalism and progressive reforms like the Federal Reserve and antitrust regulations. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, as a U.S. president, FDR instituted a New Deal program that expanded the role of the government in the economy as well as social welfare. Eleanor Roosevelt, a leading liberal activist and former First Lady, she was a key advocate for civil rights and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Key Figures Part 2. John F. Kennedy, the 35th U.S. President. Kennedy inspired a new generation of liberals with his calls for public service and social programs. Barack Obama, the 44th U.S. President. Obama championed liberal policies like the Affordable Care Act, environmental regulation, and marriage equality. Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State, Senator, and Democratic presidential nominee. Clinton has been a prominent voice for liberal internationalism and gender equality. Bernie Sanders, the current senator from Vermont who ran for the Democratic presidential nomination both in 2016 and 2020. Sanders has been a leading voice for modern American democratic socialism. Number 10. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The young congresswoman has emerged as a rising star in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. She's also a democratic socialist. Neoliberalism. About neoliberalism, Part 1. Neoliberalism is a political and economic philosophy that emerged in the late 20th century, building on some core principles of classical liberalism while also diverging in certain ways. Free market capitalism. At its core, neoliberalism advocates for an expanded role of free market capitalism, privatization, and deregulation of the economy. It generally opposes government intervention in the free market. Minimal state. Neoliberals favor a minimal role for the state, believing the free market should be the primary driver of economic and social outcomes. They seek to limit the size and scope of the government. Globalization and trade liberalization. Neoliberals support policies that promote global economic integration, free trade, and the unimpeded flow of capital, goods, and services across borders. About neoliberalism, Part 2. Austerity and fiscal conservatism. Neoliberal policies emphasize fiscal austerity, reduce government spending, and balance budgets, in contrast to Keynesian policies of deficit spending. Individualism and personal responsibility. Like classical liberals, neoliberals place a high value on individualism and personal responsibility, seeing the free market as the best way to empower individuals. Technocratic governance. Neoliberals often favor a technocratic managerial approach to governance, with decision-making driven by economic efficiency and expert opinion rather than democratic deliberation. The rise of neoliberal ideas in the late 20th century, which were in the 1960s through 1990s, led to a policy shift in many countries, including the Reagan and Thatcher administrations in the US and UK, as well as Washington Consensus promoted by global financial institutions. However, neoliberalism has also faced significant criticism for accelerating economic inequality, with Reagan's failed trickle-down economics plan, eroding the social safety net, also Reagan, and prioritizing corporate interest over the public good, also Reagan. This has led to a backlash and rise of anti-neoliberal movements in recent decades. Speech about neoliberalism. I have prepared a 2,000-word speech about the subject, and I am now going to present it. My fellow citizens, today I want to make the case for why liberals believe the principles of neoliberalism offer the best path forward for our country and our world. Now, I know that neoliberalism is a term that has taken on a lot of negative connotations in recent years. It has been painted by its critics as a heartless ideology that benefits only the wealthy elite at the expense of the working class. But I'm here to tell you that this caricature misses the true heart and purpose of neoliberal thought. At its core, neoliberalism is about unleashing the power of free markets, reducing the role of government, and empowering individuals to seek their own prosperity. And liberals believe this philosophy, when implemented thoughtfully with an eye towards fairness and opportunity for all, can deliver tremendous benefits to society. Let me start by addressing the foundational premise of neoliberalism, the primacy of free market capitalism. Liberals have long recognized the incredible creative and productive potential of unfettered private enterprise. While individuals are free to start businesses, invest capital, and engage in voluntary exchange, amazing things can happen. New innovations emerge, products and services improve, and wealth is created that can then be reinvested to generate even more economic growth. This virtuous cycle has lifted billions out of poverty worldwide and delivered unparalleled material progress for humanity. And it's not just about making the rich richer. The explosion of the middle class in places like China and India over the past few decades is a testament to the incredible power of free markets to create a broad-based, prosperous economy. Of course, we all know that completely unregulated capitalism can lead to abuses, monopolies, and environmental degradation. That's why liberals support a role for government in providing a basic social safety net, enforcing antitrust laws, and establishing reasonable rules of the road. But the key is keeping that government footprint as limited as possible, just enough to ensure fairness and prevent the worst excesses without strangling the entrepreneurial spirit. This brings me to my next core tenet of neoliberalism, the idea of minimizing the size and scope of the state. Liberals have long been wary of the dangers of an overpowerful central government. History has shown time and time again how unchecked government authority can descend into tyranny, stifle innovation, and crush individual liberty. That's why we believe in keeping the government limited in its functions, focused on protecting rights, maintaining law and order, and providing a basic social safety net, but otherwise getting out of the way and letting citizens and private enterprise take the lead. Too often we've seen how well-intentioned government programs end up becoming bloated, inefficient bureaucracies that do more harm than good. Think about the mess of our current healthcare system, a tangled web of regulations, mandates, and subsidies that has made coverage more expensive and less accessible for many Americans than any other developed country. Or consider the stifling effects of excessive occupational licensing requirements, which limit job opportunities and make it harder for entrepreneurs to get started. By contrast, neoliberals believe in freeing up individuals and businesses to chart their own course, making their own choices, and reap the rewards of their own hard work. Sure, this approach may lead to some inequality, but liberals would argue that a rising tide truly does lift all boats, and the dynamism and growth unleashed by free markets ultimately creates more opportunity for everyone. And speaking of inequality, this brings me to another key tenet of neoliberalism that liberals find compelling: the emphasis on equality of opportunity rather than equality of outcome. Something that I disagree with, but I'm going to continue. We've long rejected the idea that the government should be on the business of dictating everyone's circumstances and results. That's a recipe for stagnation, inefficiency, and the kinds of authoritarian nightmares we've seen play out in places like the Soviet Union. Instead, liberals believe the role of the government should be to remove unfair barriers, dismantle unjust privilege, and ensure a level playing field where everyone has a fair shot at success. This includes dismantling barriers for minorities and LGBT individuals. We want to see a society where the son of a janitor can grow up to be a doctor or a CEO, not because the government handed him a credential or guaranteed a job, but because he was able to develop his talents, take risks, and reap the rewards of his efforts. This notion of equal opportunity is also a key driver of our support for free trade and economic globalization, another central tenet of neoliberalism. Liberals recognize that an increasingly interconnected world, protectionism and isolation are a recipe for stagnation and decline. By tearing down trade barriers and allowing the free flow of goods, services, capital, and ideas across borders, we open up new markets, drive competition, and create more choices and opportunities for consumers and producers alike. Now, I know this can be a tough sell, especially for those who have seen their jobs displaced by foreign competition, but the reality is that while globalization may cause some localized disruption in the short term, the long-term benefits in the form of greater prosperity, more innovation, and a rising standard of living are undeniable. And we can and should implement policies to help workers adjust, retrain, and transition to the new economy, rather than trying to cling to the fading industries of the past. At the same time, liberals recognize that unfettered globalization, if not managed properly, can also lead to concerning trends like the concentration of wealth and power, the erosion of worker protections, and environmental degradation. That's why we support a balanced, thoughtful approach, one that harnesses the benefits of open markets and competition, while also ensuring a basic social safety net, strong labor and environmental safeguards, and smart public investments in infrastructure and education. This brings me to yet another key aspect of neoliberalism that liberals find compelling: the idea of technocratic, evidence-based policy making. Liberals have long been skeptical of ideological rigidity and tribal partisanship. We believe the most effective solutions come not from rigid dogma, but from careful analysis, expert input, and a pragmatic willingness to try new approaches and learn from what works. That's why we're drawn to the neoliberal emphasis on using data, economic modeling, and scientific research to guide policy decisions. From tax policy to regulatory reform to macroeconomic management, Liberals want to see leaders making choices based on solid evidence, not just political expediency or special interest influence. Of course, we also know that pure technocracy can become its own kind of dogma, divorced from the real world concerns of citizens. That's why we believe in complementing this evidence-based approach with robust democratic deliberation, where citizens have a meaningful voice in shaping the policies that affect their lives. Ultimately, what liberals find most compelling about neoliberalism is its focus on empowering individuals, unleashing dynamism, and delivering broad-based economic prosperity, while also preserving a limited, effective role for the government. Its philosophy seeks to harness the incredible creative power of free markets and free people, while also maintaining a social safety net, protecting rights and liberties, and investing in the public goods that underpin a thriving society. Now, I know that neoliberalism has its critics, and many of these critics are very valid in their thoughts. We've certainly seen how unchecked neoliberal policies, like the policies of Ronald Reagan and Trump, can lead to troubling trends like rising inequality, environmental degradation, and the concentration of corporate power. And we've all felt the human costs of economic disruptions that can accompany rapid globalization and technological change. But liberals believe that these are not inherent flaws of neoliberalism itself, but rather the result of failing to properly balance its principles with other important values and priorities. When implemented thoughtfully with an eye towards fairness, sustainability, and broad-based opportunity, the core tenets of neoliberalism, free markets, limited government, globalization, and technocratic policymaking can deliver incredible benefits to society. Just look at the remarkable progress we've seen in places like Chile, Estonia, and Singapore, where neoliberal influence reforms have helped lift millions out of poverty, spur innovation and entrepreneurship, and create thriving middle classes. Or consider how the principles of free trade and economic openness have fueled the remarkable rise of China and other developing economies, raising standards of living for billions. And yes, there have been downsides and unintended consequences too, but liberals believe the solution is not to simply reject neoliberalism wholesale, but to thoughtfully evolve and refine it, preserving its core strengths while addressing its weaknesses through smart, balanced policymaking. Just look at the remarkable progress we've seen in places like Chile, Estonia, and Singapore, where neoliberal influence reforms have helped lift millions out of poverty, spur innovation and entrepreneurship, and create thriving middle classes. Or consider how the principles of free trade and economic openness have fueled the remarkable rise of China and other developing economies, raising standards of living for billions. And yes, there have been downsides and unintended consequences too, but liberals believe the solution is not to simply reject neoliberalism wholesale, but to thoughtfully evolve and refine it, preserving its core strengths while addressing its weaknesses through smart, balanced policymaking. This means things like stronger social safety net, more progressive taxation, such as higher taxes on the wealthy and big corporations, robust labor protections, aggressive antitrust enforcement, strategic public investments, and smarter regulation to tackle issues like climate change. It means recognizing that unchecked corporate power can be just as much of a threat to freedom and opportunity as an overbearing state. And it means constantly striving to create a system that works for everyone, not just the privileged few. Ultimately, what liberals find so compelling about neoliberalism is its emphasis on individual flourishing, economic dynamism, and evidence-based policymaking. It's a philosophy that, when implemented correctly, can unleash tremendous human potential and deliver broad-based prosperity. And in an era of growing global challenges, it offers the best option for creating, as liberals see it, a fair and just society. Credits. This was adapted from the section about liberalism in Arguing About Political Philosophy. I hope you have all enjoyed this video. This has been a look at liberalism and the analysis of the political ideology. This has been Thor Hansen, signing off. I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.